Good evening. It is 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, January 5th, 2022. And this regular city council meeting is now called to order in council chambers at City Hall, 1123 West Lake Street in Sandpoint, Idaho. For the record, I am Mayor Shelby Ronstadt presiding. Also present are councilors Shannon Sherman, Deb Rule, Joel Espiro, John Darling, Kate McAllister, and Andy Grote. We will now rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll now proceed with the first consent calendar this evening. Please note that this consent calendar is for approval of prior meeting minutes and bills. We will take up the second consent calendar after our new council members are sworn in and seated. For the record, the total amount of bills is $833,895.71 for regular payables. Are there any items council wishes to remove from the consent calendar? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion that the consent calendar be approved.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. This will be a roll call vote.
Councillor Sherman,
Yes.
Councillor Rule,
Yes.
Councillor Espiro,
Yes.
Councillor Darling,
Yes.
Councillor McAllister,
Yes.
Councillor Grote.
Yes.
And the first consent calendar is approved. Next on the agenda are announcements. Are there any announcements from staff?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, a couple of announcements tonight. First, staff announcement is an introduction. I'm going to ask Greg to come up here for. Greg Lanning has joined our staff here at the city, and we announced this to council about 6 weeks ago. And Greg is our new utilities director here at the city, and he's hit the ground running this week and wanted to put a face to the name, but by background for council and the public again. Greg moved over our way from Cheyenne, Wyoming. He's been the state engineer for the state of Wyoming, so significant experience, and that was an appointment by the governor for state of Wyoming, but he also has significant experience here in Idaho as well. So he was the public works director in city of Pocatello in early 2000s, Greg. Mm-hmm. And also did a stint at city of Port Townsend, so similar size resort city, a lot of the same challenges that we have here. So as utilities director, Greg will be overseeing the operation, maintenance, and planning for our wastewater treatment facility, our water treatment plant, our utilities collection and distribution system, and also solid waste utility, otherwise known as garbage. So I wanted to give Greg, if you want to say anything to council, but we are thrilled to have him on our team. And one of the other assets that Greg really brings to us here in the city is, while it wasn't a requirement for the position, he is a licensed engineer in the state of Idaho. So we have an engineer in training on staff. We will have our contract city engineer, and now we have an engineer in utilities. So in terms of talent, skill, and really background, Greg is another great addition to our team. So that's my first announcement.
Thank you.
Nice to
Happy
meet you.
be
Thank
here. Appreciate it.
Welcome aboard.
Yep.
Pleasure to have you.
Second announcement quickly on the staff front tonight, Amy Tweeten has been hired as our city planner, and we also announced this about a month ago, I think, maybe 6 weeks ago too. We hired both closely around the same time. Amy starts with us next Monday, and she is AICP certified, has over 20 years working in a jurisdiction as a city planner near our size, resort city as well, so significant experience. And Amy's already here in the community and enjoying a little bit of a break and vacation, so not with us tonight before she hits the ground running next week. And Planning and Zoning Commission scheduled to meet in a couple of weeks, but they meet before next council meeting, so just wanted to make that announcement to council and invite you to, if you're in city offices, to certainly meet Amy or Greg. And then final staff announcement tonight, and unfortunately, he is not here tonight, but wanted to give time for the public to know and celebrate as we approach the end of this month. Kim Woodruff, our longtime Parks and Recreation Director, has decided that he is going to retire at the end of this month. And the reason he is not here to be part of this announcement tonight is he is suffering greatly in the state of Hawaii. His kids bought him a Christmas present to go to Hawaii for 10 days. So that's where he and Gina and his son and daughter-in-law are. And he is scuba diving. He texted me today. He was scuba diving with the stingrays. So that's where he is, and sends you his good wishes. But Kim has been an institution for us here at the city, and we look forward to working with the Reader and the Bee and getting some announcements and the publicity for his many accomplishments over the years. So he's working on transition planning, made his announcement shortly before the end of the year, and just said it was time for him to play hard in his retirement and continue to wear out joints. So so anyway, he'll be here for the next council meeting, but I did want to make that announcement now so the public was aware. And council, I sent you a notice about this a few weeks back. So Happy New Year.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Next are announcements from council, and as is customary at this time, we always have a few words to share regarding our outgoing council members. But I would like to refrain from that right now and just offer the council the opportunity to make any announcements that they may have that are not related to those transitioning. So is there anyone who, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to thank the snowplow people. Thank them very much. I think they've been doing a great job, and it's got to be a tough year and probably going to be tougher over the next 48 hours.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Okay, as was alluded to, this evening marks the last meeting for two of our esteemed council members. Elected in 2018, Councillor John Darling has served on council for the last 4 years. And I just want to say briefly that it's been really a pleasure to serve with John. And, you know, we don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, but I always lean on John for some perspective on how, on things that, you know, that I don't have perspective on. So he always helps me kind of round out my understanding and knowledge on issues. And what I appreciate most about John over these last 4 years is his camaraderie and his, you know, he always puts people before politics and before issues. And I really appreciate that about him. He's always, I've always felt like John's been an ally for me up here, even though, you know, we don't see eye to eye on a lot of issues. And that's really special, especially these days, given our political environment these days. So it's really been a pleasure to serve with John, and I thank you for your service to the city.
Thanks, Shelby. Appreciate that.
And I also want to recognize Councillor Shannon Sherman, who's served 2 terms, elected to council in 2014 and then re-elected in 2018, and has been our council president for the past 6 years. And Shannon too has really been I think a really solid councillor over her terms here. She's always pushed the city towards data-driven decision-making, which I think is a huge step in the right direction for a small city that's aspiring to grow into itself. Sandpoint has really grown up over the last 8 years or so, and Shannon Sherman has been a huge part of that growth and transition. And I have the utmost respect and appreciation for her, and I truly appreciate her service over that term.
Thank you.
And I would invite other council members who would like to speak to please speak up and let us know how you feel about those council members and their service here.
You don't have to.
You don't have to. You don't have to.
It's optional.
Let it all out.
Well,
Let it all out.
Well,
I'll say
So the floor is
something.
open.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
my position is unique because I got to run with you guys, and that was my first experience in politics. So I have the utmost respect for you guys. You guys are very intelligent. I view you far more intelligent than I am. So I've learned a lot from you guys these past 4 years. I wouldn't be the council member who I am. The good side, if it wasn't for you guys, and I appreciate you guys very much and what you contribute to the city. And I mean that sincerely. And I'll continue to be happy to be friends with you guys. And I look forward, and I'll probably call you guys for wisdom here and there. So you're not done with me yet. So. I do appreciate you guys very much and what you contribute. So thank you guys. Thanks. Appreciate it.
So, and I would agree. The past 2 years has been filled with challenges that have needed leadership and expertise, wisdom, humility, and you two have been a terrific example for myself. I believe this group here, as well as the rest of our citizens out there. So it is bittersweet that you're not going to be here with us today, but I deeply appreciate your graceful exit and look forward to the new things that you guys are going to be doing in the future. So thank you very much.
You made it much easier the first 2 years of sitting on city council. So I really appreciate that. I really like both of you very much. So I wish you the best of luck, because after serving as long as you did, it's a difficult position to be in sometimes. Yeah, no one likes you. Right?
That's true.
It's true. Right. So I just want to let you know that I really appreciate you. And I'm so proud, Shannon, that you're a real scientist. Thank you.
And I just like to thank both of you for the amount of public service that you've put in. It's not an easy job all the time. We don't always agree, but I think that it promotes good conversation. So thanks for the time you took out of your personal lives to be here to support the city.
Thanks, Deb.
Good luck in your adventures.
Thank you.
Gonna meet up with Kim, huh?
That's right.
Right, yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much. It's been just really a pleasure and an honor for me to serve with you guys over the last 4 years, and as well as the former council as well. I know we have some overlap there, but it's just been a wonderful experience for me to see the city really transition into what it is today. I mean, when I started on council, it was very, very different from what Sandpoint looks like today and operates like today. And that is in large part due to the wisdom of the council, I think, as well as our incredible staff. And so I just can't say thank you enough to Jennifer, to our attorneys, to all of our department heads and every single person that works within the city. It's been an amazing transition, and I'm so proud of where we've gotten to. It's been amazing. I know it's hard for a lot of people to grasp out there, you know, the changes that they may as difficult or challenging, or it's not the way things were always done. But I can tell you firsthand that Sandpoint is operating at a level that has never been seen before. And I know that it's only going to keep improving. So thank you for the opportunity to serve you, the community. I appreciate it so much. And I just really look forward to seeing how things develop from here, but from down there. So thank you. It's been a wonderful journey.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the city of Sandpoint for, I'm honored to have served as a council member for the last 4 years. I thank them for trusting me with the decision-making process that it takes for these daily or weekly decisions that we have to make up here. You know, spent the last 4 years making decisions on multimodal transportation plans to wastewater treatment facilities. But after thinking about it this last week, I think my most honored project was the resurrection of the memorial field. I truly feel like that's going to create a legacy that we will leave for future generations, and it will be greatly used. Lastly, I just want to let the new council know that I'm be praying for them daily and all their tough and exciting decisions that they'll be making over these next few years. And if you ever need an opinion from a born and raised local native, just my phone's wide open for you. So thanks again. Appreciate it. Thank you.
John, I know I'm not a council member, but please pray for me too.
I do every day, Shelby.
There is one last action that I'm going to require of both of you. And actually, wait, before I go there, I was going to ask you that question, John, so I'm glad that you said that. And I want to give you the opportunity to answer that question. Shannon, is there an action, a project, a legacy that you are most proud of here in your time here at the City of
Oh,
Sandpoint?
gosh, that's a tough one. I'm definitely not uncomfortable being put on the spot at all, but I think it really comes down to the wisdom of the collective council. I was super proud that we were able to create the city's first strategic plan. It's, operating a city without a strategic plan is just a really, really bad idea. And I think everybody that came before us had the very best of intentions and we're doing, their jobs to the best of their ability. But until you have that roadmap in front of you, it's just really impossible to grow in a really positive direction. And so I was just absolutely thrilled to be part of that first strategic plan. And it's even better when I see it being updated and used and not sitting on a shelf, and that all the new people coming in are contributing to that process and lending their ideas. And it's just going to get better and better.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. So your last order of business, I'm going to invite each of you down individually and present you with an award. So we're going to start with John.
A major.
Follow you.
Follow me.
Let's hope so.
It's your last photo. Oh, we're gonna wait. I gotta hand it to him. Don't I hand it to him first? Let me do whatever you want. How do you want to do this? Do you have a plan here?
I do.
Okay. Push it. Yeah, so we'll start with this.
He's Madam Clerk.
There's that one.
Thank you, sir.
Congratulations. Thank you for your service.
Appreciate you.
And then we have a gift here. Sandpoint, a small town with a big heart. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this book. It's been around for a little while.
That's a great book. Thanks, Shelby.
Thank you. And there's something in there for you as well.
That's so nice. Appreciate that. Thanks again.
Pleasure.
Pleasure.
All right, Shannon, your turn. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And you get the same book.
All right.
Oh.
I was going to be mad if I didn't. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
All right. So with that, this is the slightly awkward part of the meeting, but feel free to move on. You are now free.
Well, you're not staying for the meeting?
Good.
Okay. Please come for, or wait a minute. Yeah, we'll start with Joel Espiro. Councilman Espiro, please come forward. And we're going to have to do the swearing of the oath. All right. Thank you. Do you, Joel Espiro, solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Idaho?
I do.
And that you will faithfully discharge the duties of City Councilor of the city of Sandpoint according to the best of your ability?
I do. I will.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
We've got the big screens,
Sign
guys.
that out.
Take
Yeah,
pictures.
you can.
Yeah, there's plenty of screens.
We'll make fun of you behind. Very much.
Your hair's stuck.
Thank you.
Thanks, Troy.
Thank you, guys.
Ben might be balding.
Jason Walker, come forward. And please raise your right hand. Do you, Jason Welker, solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Idaho? I do. And that you will faithfully discharge the duties of City Councillor of the City of Sandpoint according to the best of your ability? I will. Congratulations. Thank you, Shelby. Justin?
Oh, we have him down there.
Please raise your right hand. Thank you. Do you, Justin Dick, solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Idaho? I do. Will faithfully discharge the duties of City Councillor of the City of Sandpoint according to the best of your ability? I will. Welcome to the City Council. Justin, and then please come join us at the dais. Jason, you're welcome to come join us at the dais.
Because I brought it up. She's like, "No, you guys."
Welcome aboard, bud.
Justin.
Welcome.
All right. Make yourself comfortable. Take your coat off, stay a while.
Yeah, settle in.
It is going to be a quick
The
meeting.
massage button's right here.
Easy.
Okay, with our new council members sworn in, we'll now proceed with roll call of the council now seated. Present are councilors Deb Rule, Joel Aspiro, Kate McAllister, Andy Grout, Jason Welker, and Justin Dick. Next on the agenda is the election of the new council president. Are there any nominations for the next city council president?
I have a nomination, Mr. Mayor.
Okay,
I'd like to say something. Councilwoman Deb Rule has been on here for many years, and I respect that very much. And I respect your service and what you have done. And many times it is thought of as senior member should be elected council president. But I feel most comfortable nominating Kate McAllister with her position with the chambers and her life experience. And what I've seen personally, I believe she has what it takes to be the most effective council president for us. And that is my opinion. And it's no disrespect to anybody else whatsoever. So I would like to nominate Kate McAllister for council president, Mr. Mayor.
okay. Is there do you accept?
Absolutely. I am very honored. Thank you.
Is there a second?
There's a second.
Okay. This will be a roll call vote. First, I would invite the opportunity for any discussion. Okay. This will be a roll call vote.
Councillor Groot,
Yes.
Councillor Dick,
Yes.
Councillor Rule,
Yes.
Councillor Spurrow,
Yes.
Councillor Welker,
Yes.
Councillor McAllister.
Yes.
Right. We'll now proceed with the public forum portion of the meeting, which allows the public the opportunity to address the council and myself on items either listed on the consent calendar or any topic not listed on the agenda. Those here in chambers who wish to speak will need to complete a sign-up form in the front of the room and hand it to the clerk up front here. The forms, as I said, are up there by the door. If you're on Zoom and wish to speak, please raise your hand to be unmuted by our clerk. Public comment opportunities during meetings are for comments only. Do not direct any questions to council or myself or to staff, and do not approach the dais. Comments shall not be personally derogatory, nor shall they be personally directed at any individual, organization, or business. Each speaker will be allowed 3 minutes. Do we have anyone signed up to speak, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Kate Huseman.
Okay, please come forward, Ms. Huseman. Pleasure to have you with us this evening.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Kate Huseman. I've met a lot of you. I served on the Planning and Zoning Commission for several years, and I'm now taking a break. But I want to take this opportunity to tell you about some concerns I have about housing. I'm happy to see both the old and the new faces here, and I'm hopeful you will address these concerns. I think we all know we have a housing issue, as do many communities like ours around the country and the world. The first of 4 points I want to emphasize is that the market will not solve this problem. The market includes many, many buyers who don't work here and many who don't even live here. They can pay more money to buy whatever houses we build than the people who work here can afford. So the market won't get us out of this, but we can address it with planning and economic tools. We didn't do that this past year. We lost an entire year to unparalleled development of unaffordable houses because we did not have planning leadership to lead us through updating our comp plan and writing code to enforce it. It was frustrating to watch our buildable land fill up with houses that local workers will not be able to live in. Second, I am pleased to hear that a planning director has finally been hired, just as I was pleased to hear that one had finally been hired last summer. It is important to review and understand why this post has been vacant so long and why we lost the planning staff we had. You will need to make sure that the new planning director has the support, structure, and authority she needs to be effective. Third, we need to address how our comp plan works with our transportation plan. We will have to make difficult choices between how we want our neighborhoods to function and how we want our increasing traffic to flow. This past year, we prioritized traffic flow along North Boyer. We allowed construction on double frontage lots, which our current comp plan discourages. This means that residents of the new neighborhoods being built in the northern part of town are unlikely to enjoy a quiet, walkable grid of streets similar to those of the south, which our current comp plan encourages. If we want to make this trade-off, fine, but we need to actively decide that traffic is our priority rather than letting the requirements of one plan override the vision of another.
Kate, you have 30 seconds.
Finally, and most urgently, we need to attract developers and builders who want to build the housing we need for our working community members. We need to provide them with tools that enable them to build such housing at a reasonable profit. We need to make sure that they know about opportunities available through the Bonner Community Housing Agency, Connexu Land Trust, the State Housing Trust Fund, and other resources. Please don't wait for the revised comp plan, the current task force, or a study to be completed before you act on this. Structures and incentives to strongly encourage builders to use these resources need to be put in place now before things start heating up again in the spring. I have a few other concerns, but I couldn't fit them all into 3 minutes. I'll come back in a few weeks to talk about those, but in the meantime, housing is the big one, and I'm hoping you'll hop on. Thanks so much for what I know will be a challenging service, and good luck.
Thank you, Ms. Huseman. Appreciate that, and we appreciate your long service.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk?
There isn't anyone else who has indicated they wish to speak, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Hearing none, we will now proceed with the main consent calendar for this evening's meeting. Are there any items council wishes to remove from the consent calendar? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion that the consent calendar be approved.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. I want to say in advance that I appreciate the council's confirmation of the 8 people that I selected to serve on the Arts, Culture, and Historic Preservation Commission. I think that these are 8 fine candidates who've already demonstrated their commitment to serve the city of Sandpoint in various capacities. I think they're all highly qualified. And to those 8 candidates who've been selected, nominated, I truly appreciate your willingness to serve, and I look forward to working with you in your capacity, if the council is so willing to approve those confirmations or confirm those appointments rather. So with that, this will be a roll call vote.
Councillor Rule,
Yes.
Councillor Groot,
Yes.
Councillor Welker,
Yes.
Councillor McAllister,
Yes.
Councillor Dick,
Yes.
Councillor Sprow.
Yes.
Motion passes. The first item under old business is a presentation on the water and wastewater cost of service rate study and new user facility fee update. City Administrator Jennifer Stapleton will provide a presentation, or we'll get us started with an introduction of this item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. By way of background for our 2 new council members and for the community, we have engaged in a water and wastewater rate study and new user facility fee update and have contracted with FCS Group to help us in that regard. And this will be an activity, the analysis and will be taking place over about the next 4 to 5 months with final results to come back to the council and recommendations later this spring. And so I'm sure this will be one of your more scintillating topics, but a very important one for the community, for the public, our ratepayers in our community, both our water and our wastewater ratepayers. So we have Angie Sanchez with us tonight from the FCS Group, and she will be presenting basically kind of like a workshop session. So she's going to be covering an overview of the rate study, what's incorporated. This is your opportunity to ask any questions about what this is all about, what they will be considering as they move forward. They have all of our data from the city on our rate structure, our data on what people have been paying, issues that we've seen on the city end as well. It's been over 10 years since we have conducted a full rate study and update, so this is long overdue. And as Angie will present to you tonight, this also includes an equity analysis looking at the various different types of ratepayers as well. So with that, thank you for joining us tonight, Angie. I know you had probably some treacherous roads, certainly not ours.
Hopefully not all the way back, right?
But thank you for coming in person and presenting, and thank you also, Brooke, for helping out with this.
That's right. We also have Brooke Tasha from FCS Group remote. So Brooke is the project manager on the project. I'm project principal, and so we are happy to be before you and engaged in this particular water, wastewater cost of service and new user facility fee study. It is a comprehensive study, as Jennifer had mentioned, and so it will take some time and to wade through the data, get through the process, apply the various different industry standard approaches and methodologies, and finally come back with some results to you all. But we are engaged. We have started the process. And before we get too far along, really what we want to do is make sure to come back to council and get engaged in terms of really what are we all looking for out of this particular study. I know all of us probably have some various different issues, priorities, objectives that we want to accomplish through this rate study process, maybe answers, things that we've heard about. And so again, before we get too far along, we want to engage council to get some of those things on the table so that as we're going through the process, we're able to address those various different issues. This evening, really what we'd like to do, I'm not sure how familiar any of you are with the rate study process. And so we want to go through that particular process and the tasks that are involved in that. some key assumptions and deliverables that we'll be looking at in terms of each of the technical analysis that we'll be going through, and also key inputs and variables, as well as policies and fiscal priorities that we want to have, and have you all engage in terms of what do we want our utilities to look like, how do we want them managed, what do we look like today, and really what do we want these utilities to look like in the future? What do we need to accomplish with them? And so again, that's what our workshop this evening will be, is really taking that big picture look, getting some issues on the table, hopefully this evening, so that as we work through the process, we can address some of those items. In terms of just the in general rate study process, the governing statutes that we have there, Idaho Code Title 50, essentially allows for cities to prescribe and collect rates, fees, tolls, or charges. And so that's really what gives us the authority to conduct rate studies and also to set fees and charges for the user rates that we assess. Ongoing user rates in terms of section 1032, the key there is we shall be and always remain self-sufficient. That's really when we look at rate studies, we're looking at, do the fees that we charge for individually the water utility, individually for the wastewater utility, do they support the overall objectives that we have in terms of those overall needs? So operating costs, debt service, capital needs, that's really what we're going for in terms of self-supporting. New user facilities, on the other hand, are not for existing customers. They're for new users connecting to the system. So as new users come in, they request service. That's what the new user facilities fees are for. They are governed by the Idaho Supreme Court ruling in 2015 related to NIPCA versus the city of Hayden. So there was a methodology that was placed out there in terms of that particular court case. It does identify a methodology, and that methodology has been used since that court case for people to update those particular fees and charges. So it is a prescribed methodology that we will be using to do that. One of the key things really in that particular methodology, which is a bit unfortunate, is that it does not allow for including future facility costs. So we're strictly only allowed to look at existing costs that are in the ground today, the existing investment in the ground today. As you put additional costs or additional facilities into the system, once they're working, then we can collect those fees, but we cannot look and include future costs in those various different fees. So that's a big change in terms of that methodology. In terms of role of rate studies, again, the key there, self-sufficient utilities. We want to quantify the operating and capital needs. We want to set rates to independently cover costs, but we also want to account for changing conditions. And so as we look at what we look like today, what are some of the changes that we might be faced with? Do we have changes in use, flow, demand? Do we have growth changes that we need to account for? What are the things that, again, we might take the snapshot today and here's what we look like. What might we look like in the future? And how can we account for that and plan for that as we're moving through this rate study process? We also want to reflect policies and priorities of council and the community. Equity has been known to be one of those things that we said, yes, we want our rates to be equitable and cost-based. And so that's going to be one of the key components here in priorities. But we also need to have revenue stability. We need to be able to pay our overall obligations that we have, as well as upcoming capital needs. Financial resiliency in the long term also is important, but balancing that with affordability. And so now you can start kind of seeing the struggle of the rate study process is we have these needs, we have these fees. They may, for some, be affordable, for others not. How do we balance those particular priorities while continuing to operate our utilities in a self-sufficient basis? And so that's going to be the balancing act there. So just really quickly kind of talking a little bit about the utilities, just to give us again, just kind of set everybody on the same page. Our water service overview. So we do have supply and treatment. So 2 water treatment plants with a combined capacity of about 13.2 million gallons a day. Water is drawn from Lake Pend Oreille and the Little Sand Creek. There's some storage facilities. So it's 2 storage reservoirs with total storage of 3.77 million gallons per day. And we have a distribution, 1 active booster pump station with roughly 92 miles of pipeline. We have estimated about 42.6 million asset value. That is a book value. The new user facility fee will actually be looking at those particular assets in the ground. I suspect that 42.6 is actually low when considering the actual assets that are in the ground functioning today. So that is something that the new user facility fee will be reviewing. And it's very common that's kind of what we're running into with a number of different utilities, is that is an understated value. In terms of our water customer base, what do we look like? How do we use?
Can I pause you for 1 second? So
Absolutely.
that's not just, a function of inflation, but these are just underrepresented values.
Right, and the investment that you have, kind of what's booked in the particular asset register today.
Okay.
So in terms of our water customer base, so how many accounts do we have versus what the water use? You can see the two pie charts there. So our single family in terms of accounts makes up the majority, about 78%. But if you look on the water use slide, they make up about 48% of the water use. And again, similarly, you can see commercial, 14% of accounts, 28% of the usage, multifamily, 7% of the accounts, multifamily in terms of water use, 12%. And so you can kind of see there's a little bit of a mismatch, you know, if we're looking at strictly accounts and how much water is used, that will begin to come into play as we look at the cost of service analysis, because one of the things that we look at is how much total water is used by those particular customer classes. You know, that will be a basis of one of the cost assignments that we'll use along with some other things. Okay, but that kind of tells us some things just initially off the bat, and important to just kind of understand what we look like today. In terms of the sanitary sewer side of things, a treatment plant, so it treats about 1.7 million gallons per day. That is a 5-year average. Peak day is about 8.3 million gallons a day. Facility replacement is underway. So that is one of the drivers of the rate study process, is the particular capital costs on the wastewater side of things. Conveyance system, again, fairly old, originally constructed in 1900s, 18 city operated lift stations, and 268,000 feet of gravity sanitary sewer main. So quite a bit of facilities in place and having to be, you know, maintained and operated, et cetera. 26.5 million asset value. And again, there, yes, it is an older system, but again, there we'll be looking at with the new user facility fee, do we have that accurately represented in terms of the value there? In terms of accounts and flow, single family similarly is a majority of the accounts on your sewer, sanitary sewer. In terms of flow, they're about 32%, so 75% accounts, 32% flow. Commercial is 15% of your accounts with about 42% of your flow. And then multifamily and industrial again make up the other part, as well as the large user and wholesale.
Really quickly, could you help, maybe Mr. Mayor, you could help me with this. Give me an example of one of our industrial users to a commercial user. Can you parse like which one those would be? Like what would say Lighthouse be? Are they commercial or are they industrial?
That's a
What
good
about
question.
industrial?
They're going to be an industrial user, Mr. Mayor.
And then
Lighthouse would be an industrial user.
commercial, for example, or a restaurant.
Commercial user could be Trinity or Joel's Restaurants,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Perfect.
Playing to the crowd here.
Wonderful. Okay, so again, that was just to give us a quick little snapshot of, as we're thinking about these rate setting, really what are we looking at in terms of facilities, investments, what are we operating, what are the facilities that we're needing to operate? And so now we're going to switch over to setting the framework in terms of the rate study process. So as we look at utility rate making, rates are set to recover the cost of providing service. And so that's really the overall objective there. We generally will have two primary types of costs. So we have operating costs and capital costs. Operating costs are fairly easy to understand. They fairly steadily increase over time, generally with inflation, et cetera. Capital costs, however, tend to be fairly irregular. So there's peaks and valleys. And so the overall objective there, how do we create a plan that stabilizes our rates, even though some of our costs are stable, some of our costs have these peaks and valleys. How do we create a stable plan so we're not impacting customer rates and they're not, the rates aren't going up and down every other year. And so that becomes, again, what we look at on the basis of our particular rate studies and the overall objective, stabilizing the rates while still providing enough funding to accomplish our overall needs. In terms of the key rate study steps, and so we kind of take a fairly, methodical approach here. The first one being, again, why we're here in front of you all today, which is setting the stage, which is identifying sensitivities, priorities, issues that we want to resolve when we begin the rate study process. We're going to get everything on the table in terms of what we need to be resolving by the time we get to number 5 or number 6 in terms of setting our rates. The second one is fiscal policies. Fiscal policies are there to set the framework and foundation for how our utilities are managed. What kind of informal practices or policies does the city have that help manage our particular utilities? We will be reviewing them. We'll provide suggestions if there are not in various different policies in place that maybe some industry standards may suggest that there would be a good idea to have some. And so we'll provide some recommendations and review what you all have today, and then again, what you might want to consider as you move forward with management of the utilities. But that really does set the stage and foundation for how do we manage our utilities? What do we look like? The revenue needs assessment on number 3 there talks about revenue requirement or forecasting our costs and revenues. So again, how much revenue do we have coming in? What are our expenses going out? Are our existing rates covering our needs, or do we need to adjust rates at some level? So that's kind of the pie. We're building the pie. What is the total pie? Cost of service on number 4 there begins the equity evaluation. Now it's going to start slicing the pie to say, well, how much of that overall pie is single family residential responsible for? How much is multifamily, commercial, industrial responsible for? That cost of service analysis is grounded in industry standards. So we do use American Water Works Association methodologies, Water Environment Federation methodologies. And so it is grounded in industry standard accepted methodologies. And so again, we'll go through those particular analyses with you as we get to that point with your particular systems. And then finally, rate structure is the critical piece. This is the, what people receive on their bill. So as they get their bill, they're going to see how much are you charging me for my fixed charge, for my variable charge, water, sewer, what is my total bill? And so what we communicate with our rate structure is important. It has been some time, as Jennifer had mentioned, since the last rate study process. Sometimes our rate structures evolve with us. Sometimes priorities are different. Our priorities might have been different 10 years ago than they are today. So we'll be looking at our rate structures, assessing the, again, council and community to identify, do our current rate structures satisfy what we're trying to accomplish today? And so sometimes if it's not, if there's a mismatch, then we'll provide and suggest alternative rate structures or changes in rate structures to better make that alignment. Okay, recalibrate it. And then finally, we can do all these wonderful things with a technical analysis, but if we don't have a good public education and engagement process, then it can pretty much just fail. And so again, here, open, transparent, understandable basis in terms of what we're doing, how we got to various different numbers, what kind of impacts, and why we're making these various recommendations is what we do on number 6. Okay. Again, understanding sensitivities and priorities. This is just a sample of what some of those priorities might be, and council can kind of begin thinking about if they're at the end of this particular presentation, we might, look to you all to provide us with some suggestions. And so how do you feel about growth? What do you think about rate setting? Do you like 1-year rate setting? Would you prefer a multi-year rate setting process that we come back with? Equity, how is equity important to you all in terms of that particular approach? How do you feel about conservation? Affordability. And so those are the kind of things that we want to be thinking about in terms of this rate setting process, and the feedback we'd love to hear from you all in terms of what we need to be considering as we move forward. There will be more touch points to be able to, infuse your opinions and input in terms of this particular process. But this is just kind of getting us to think of this particular needs.
Can I ask you what you mean by continue encouraging conservation?
Yeah, so some utilities, again, it's been a while since you've done the rate study process. And what we've seen over time is that conservation used to be we want to conserve. There's water supply issues, resource issues in terms of supply capacity. And so conservation was something that people wanted to generally move forward with fairly intensely. Over time, for some reason, it's been slowly it's been declining in terms of the priority, and affordability is starting to become more important. And so sometimes when you have a lot of conservation, rates get fairly high, right? And so again, we still have to collect the same amount of revenue. Now we're asking to collect the same amount of revenue with less water use. And so it's that balancing. And so how are you all feeling about conservation and your rate structure? Yes, we still want to stay the path. We have this great, 4-tier rate structure, conservation based rate. It's meeting our objectives. Wonderful. Or do we need to be relooking at that? Do we need 4 blocks? Can we reduce it to 3? Is the incline in the rates, in terms of the 1 block, 2 block, 3 block, is the differential enough or not, or too much? Okay, and so again, those are the things we'll be looking at to be weighing, do we need to make changes or do we need to stay the course? Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, so again, sometimes people want to ease up a little bit in terms of conservation.
Yeah.
Fiscal policies, as noted, there will be a review of your existing fiscal policies, as well as maybe some recommendations for possible fiscal policies that you may want to consider. We have a list here with probably the top 4, the operating reserve, capital contingency, capital replacement, and debt service probably being the most common. And so again, we will be looking at your particular policies and identifying if you generally have those in place, or if that's something of an interest that you'd like to have in place. You do have an operating reserve, about I think it's 25% of operating costs in terms of actually in writing. And so that's about 90 days of operating and maintenance expenses. So the city does have that particular policy. We may want to consider a capital contingency reserve for any type of emergency reserves that we may have out there, and a capital replacement funding. That's probably the one thing that we see that is missing the most is that a lot of times what's remaining for capital is what's left over after you pay all the other bills, rather than being really intentional about, we have this unfunded liability, we have a replacement need that we need to be funding. We're going to fund X amount per year. So let's say I want to fund depreciation expense in every year. And so we are intentional about funding depreciation expense rather than saying whatever's available after all my other bills is what I'm going to have left over for capital. And so those are going to be the sensitivities and scenarios that we'll run for you all, as well as what are you doing today? If you wanted to incorporate a policy such as this, what kind of rate impact would that mean? Okay. And then debt service coverage, if you have any type of outstanding debt, usually will require to have some type of debt service coverage from your bond covenants. Okay, and so we'll look at that. The last three are something that is good practice, but not necessarily seen by or implemented by everyone. Again, a rate setting policy, I've mentioned 1 year versus a multi-year type of process. Sometimes councils like to say, we want to set rates for 3 years at a time or 5 years at a time and then come back. And so that's a policy that can be considered, as well as, what does revenue sufficiency mean to council? Is it just covering operating costs, or is it covering operating costs, capital costs in terms of system reinvestment and fiscal policies? And so really trying to define, what does that mean? What does revenue sufficiency mean to the city? And what do you want to make sure to capture in your rates? One that we're seeing is very common in the industry now is annual rate increases. And so actually incorporating a policy that you will just automatically have rate increases every year tied to something like CPI. And so basically what it's helping you do is not get too far behind. Okay, so it's just kind of keeping up with inflation type of costs. And so that's something, again, for consideration. So in terms of revenue requirements, we're going to go on the first technical task there. What is it? It's again trying to identify what your total utility financial obligations are. Why we do it is this is what's going to result in the overall rate strategy for that particular system. And so what are our overall needs compared to what we're currently collecting today? And is it sufficient, or do we need a rate increase? The overview there, again, we're going to look at operating and maintenance expenses, debt service, capital cost, and the funding approach in terms of how we're going to fund that with those various different capital needs. And that determines what our overall financial obligations are. And so those are our direct costs, but we also want to make sure that we're funding our indirect costs. And so if we have target reserve levels, whether they be operating, capital, et cetera, we want to make sure that we're also funding that within our rates. We will evaluate the sufficiency of current rates on a standalone basis. So when we go into rate studies, we're not assuming that you're going to have a rate increase. We're going in saying, what do you currently charge today? And is it sufficient? And are we meeting our needs? And so we don't automatically assume that you'll need a rate adjustment. We're just evaluating how your rates are doing to your overall needs. And if there is a need for an adjustment, then we'll assist crafting an annual rate implementation strategy that again balances financial needs with customer impact, because we understand that push and pull. Capital funding plan, probably the most significant cost of the overall utilities. Here, we're really going to be digging in terms of your overall plans, what those plans identify as your overall needs for not only today, but a multi-year time period. So our rate studies go out 20 years. We know as you get out farther over time, it's going to be pretty significant. So rate setting will probably be more like the 1 to 5 years, but we still take a peek because we want to make sure, what do we have out there? What do we need to keep in our sights in order to make sure that we're not going to get behind? And, we know what's coming up. We're not going to fall off the cliff. And so we'll really be looking at their capital improvement plans with staff to identify what those needs are. Again, looking at replacement, capacity enhancing type costs for growth, as well as regulatory requirements. When we look at capital, we'll look at it on an annual basis, and we'll identify here, what are our overall capital needs? What existing resources do we have? So do we have cash? Do we have savings? What do we have in order to meet some of these various different needs? What kind of developer contributions might we have in terms of our new user facility fees? After which, if there's still something left over and we're unable to fund it, then we say, okay, do we need to then go out for a debt issue in order to fund that need or to execute that capital plan in the timing that it's stated? Or do we need to shift our timing? And can we shift our timing? And so working with staff again to figure out timing and priority in terms of your capital plan. So we know this is a dynamic type of tool, right? So we're going to put our numbers in at first. It's going to spit out a number and it's going to tell us what the overall needs are going to be based on what the plan says. And then we know we're going to have to come back and start adjusting and figuring out what a workable plan is for your community. In terms of rate funded system reinvestment, as we talked about, again, we'll have that conversation with you in terms of, do we want to be a little bit more intentional about funding our replacement needs in terms of our overall rates, and how much capital do our rates actually support today rather than again, waiting just to see what's left over to fund our capital. And we'll be able to communicate really what that means in terms of overall impact. But the goal there is to maintain ongoing system reliability and sustainability. We'll also ask about alternative capital considerations. So I know there was some discussion of potential regionalization. So we'll say, here's where we are today. If we go on business as usual, here's what we look like. If we took this alternative approach, what are the factors that would change with this alternative approach? And then what do the rate impacts look like in that particular case? Okay, and so if there could be others, that's one that we kind of have put on the table at this particular point. And then again, it's a dynamic workable plan, really trying to get rate stability through timing and prioritization. So it may mean that we might have to change timing, priority of various different capital projects, working with staff to help us identify, what are those critical components that we need to do so that we're not fined for regulatory requirements, et cetera, or, we're not going to get ourselves in some type of situation with level of service delivery. But if we're held to a certain amount, what does that mean? How much capital can we actually fund? And is it okay? Or if we make this decision, council, we just need to be aware that this could have various different implications. Okay. Capital funding approaches is one that you all will weigh in on quite a bit here, which is there's a number of different approaches. Some council have a kind of pay as you go, what we call a cash funding approach, which they say, no way, no how, we're not going to have any debt. We're going to pay everything cash. That has some pretty big rate impacts, but also puts the burden on existing customers, even though there's some capital facilities that are going to benefit future customers. Okay, so it's okay if that was your philosophy, just understanding what the implication and consequences are if that is your philosophy. Debt financing, the other way around, has kind of the lowest near-term rate impacts. You're spreading costs out, you're adding additional costs because of the interest, but it could more closely align with how those particular projects are, the life of those particular projects. So if it's a project that has a long life and it has extra capacity, we don't want to necessarily be burdening existing ratepayers for something that future ratepayers are going to be benefiting from. So if we use debt, the future ratepayers will be able to benefit and are going to help pay for the debt service associated with that capital project. Sometimes it's called intergenerational equity as well. Okay. And the hybrid, which is probably what we like the best, which is there are some capital projects that we really should be funding through rates. System repair and replacement generally should be funded through rates. Those are the facilities that are, wearing out and becoming worn out today. Those are what existing customers are using today. And so we want to, if we're having to replace them, rates should be supporting that. If it's something that's capacity enhancing or longer life, we probably want to, be thinking about debt financing for that. And so again, we'll talk about that and what makes sense in terms of the community and your philosophy.
Angie, I really appreciate the term intergenerational equity as opposed to debt financing. It sounds so much better.
Noted. When we get down to the revenue requirement, and again, this is example only, so I just want to emphasize that red font there, is revenue requirement. What we'll have for each of your utilities is we'll come back and say, what are our overall obligations in terms of operating, debt, replacement reserves, et cetera. What is our existing revenue and how much does it support? And how much may we need to cover in terms of that gap in order to meet our overall obligations? And so again, this is just an example graph. Yours will be tailored to your own particular situation, but this is essentially what we're going to come back to. Big pie, what are our needs? How much revenues do we have? What do they support? If there's a differential, what is that gap? Equity evaluation. So cost of service is again slicing the pie. When we think about cost of service, the main question that we're trying to answer is there a cost difference to serve different customer classes of service? Many times people say, well, water's water. Why is it not the same regardless of who you are? What we look at when we look at industry standard methodology is that there are different costs and different cost bases for what services we provide. And so not only the total amount of water that you use, but also if you're causing a peak on our system, we're having to oversize the facilities that we're having to build and maintain for maybe 2 or 3 months out of the year, when really our system could look very different if we didn't have that peak. And so there is a cost for peaking, and we'll show you a graphic of your particular system and you can kind of see what that looks like. Fire flow requirements. There are, again, oversizing needs to meet fire flow requirements. So a commercial building has a different requirement than a residential customer. And so that starts to become how these cost differences are generated when we start looking at cost of service and why there would be a cost difference to serve a residential customer versus a commercial or an industrial customer. Okay, so there's going to be those cost differences, and we'll again come back and dive into that in more detail as we have your specific results. But we'll look at items such as use and demand, facility requirements, and planning and engineering. You know, what kind of service are you requesting, and what do we need, and what does it cost us to provide that particular service? The existing customer classes that we're looking at. And so again, if you see something here that is not, you know, that you're thinking something different or like to see a different customer class, we'd want to hear about that as well. We're looking at for water, single family, multifamily, commercial, irrigation, industrial, large user, and wholesale water districts. That's kind of who you have today. But if there's a different customer segment that we wanted to pull out, that would be what we want to hear about as well today.
And how would you characterize large user relative to those others?
That one, I'm not sure who the large user is. It might be a water district.
No, well, I mean, that's also an option on here. So,
Yeah.
10 kids.
okay.
You're not there yet.
No,
Keep
almost.
going.
The industrial is Lighthouse. I know that. Let me check. I think I had that somewhere.
Amanda, do you know that off the top of your head?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's neither here nor there. I was just curious.
Yeah,
That
'cause
stood out to me.
Wholesale's Northside Water Association, Syringa Heights, and Idlewise. And so those are wholesale. Yeah, so you may not have a lot of water, large users in the system, but it could be, you know, again, very much similar to a Lighthouse or just a large user that has a significant amount of water use that is different than, you know, a commercial irrigation, because it's so much larger that we'd want to, again, the service requirements would be different to serve them than a typical customer.
Sure.
Wastewater on that side is residential, multifamily, and then commercial 1 and 2, which the differential there being non-grease producers and grease producers. Okay, so that's kind of what we're looking at there. We talked a little bit about what makes the customer class distinct. And so we will be looking at, in terms of industry standard, various different kind of customer profiles based on your customer data. And so how do, you know, what is the total use of each of your water customers and sewer customers and flow? What are their usage patterns? Is there seasonality to their patterns? And does that make a difference? What are their fire flow requirements or strength contributions? So obviously if you're higher strength, it's a higher cost to treat that. Special service requirements that, you know, again, may be needed there. So whether your wholesale customers or your large user or your industrials may have special service requirements that we want to have into consideration, and other issues in terms of policy issues that we want to consider. So low income type of costs, et cetera. But these are some of the things that will start differentiating why one rate would be higher than another rate for some of your customer groupings. So here's that graphic that I had talked about in terms of your customer class water demand profiles. And so this is what we had for fiscal year 2021, January through December. And so you can see the color coding there, residential, multifamily, each of your customer classes on water side. So your large user and your industrial, you can see it's pretty flat throughout the year. Really is not a whole lot of peaking. They're pretty much just kind of using the similar amount throughout the year. As we go out over time, your multifamily and commercial in terms of the orange and the gray and the purple irrigation, you can start seeing that peak during the summertime. So there is a little bit of a peak there. But in general, your residential class has the highest peak in terms of their overall average to, you know, to the peak. And so if we cut off that peak, our system could be very different. It could look very different. It could be sized very different. But because we do have to build for that peak, we have to be able to serve, our systems have to be able to, you know, meet that capacity. That is essentially needing to sit there idle for the rest of the year, but we still have to maintain and build that capacity in there. There is a cost to that peaking. Okay, and so as we come back and as we look at what costs are peak related in our systems, the residential class sometimes gets allocated a higher portion of those peaking costs because they're the class that puts the most peak demand on the system. Okay, so again, we'll talk more about those concepts as we get to the cost of service phase, but we always like to kind of just see what that kind of looks like at the very beginning. So the results of the cost of service, again, just an example only on the table below, which is we're going to identify how capital will be distributed among your customer classes. Compare the present revenue collected from a customer class to the allocated cost to serve. Identify if there's any interclass adjustments that are going to be warranted. So the first question revenue requirement is going to say, well, we might need a 3% overall rate increase. Cost of service might say that this particular class is off by 10%. Okay, so overall, we might need 3%, but that particular class might need a 10% rate increase to get closer to their cost of service. And so those are the differences that could come out of a cost of service approach versus then just looking at the overall needs. Plus or minus 5% of the overall average is kind of industry standard practice, that if you're within that plus or minus 5% of the overall average, you're pretty close to cost of service. You know, there is some, depending on the year that you're looking at, you can fluctuate. So we don't want to say it's this hardcore, it has to be, you know, what this is. And so we give it a range of plus or minus 5%. If you look at the table below as an example, where the residential class, existing revenue 5.6 billion, cost of service says it should be 5.8. They're within 3.24% of a 0% overall adjustment. We'd probably say they're within their cost of service. No need to make an adjustment there. Multifamily, on the other hand, looks like it could go down 25%. There we would say, okay, you know what, we probably want to think about adjusting that multifamily rate down. And then commercial, it might be on a watch. It's maybe 6%, a little above 5, might be okay. You could make some changes. You might just want to watch it in the next rate study. If it has changed any significantly higher, you know, out of range, then we'd make some adjustments or recommend some adjustments.
And to be clear, this was just an example, because this is
Just
one
an
of the,
example.
yeah,
That's
this
right.
is-
We're always trying to say example. Like,
excuse me, one of the slides that jumped out at me, I'm like, that's a big negative number. What exactly does that
that's
mean?
right. That's right. I think if we could make it blank, we probably would.
Yeah,
Example
for sure.
only, but
Thank you.
just trying to give you an idea of what will the deliverable would be in terms of the cost of service. And then finally get into one of the last pieces, rate design. And that is, how do you charge for your classes? So we saw, what is our overall revenue need? How does it slice out between our customer classes? Rate design says, okay, now that I know the piece, how do I collect that piece of revenue for this customer class? And so here we're looking at fixed charges versus variable charges. What is a proportion of that? Is it, again, is it appropriate? Is it meeting our needs in terms of revenue stability as well as price signaling? It does need to generate sufficient revenue. So that is the overall goal. We want to collect that, you know, target pie piece. And so we need to make sure that it's doing that. We also want to meet other possible goals and objectives of the utility. So again, are there conservation objectives? Are there revenue stability objectives? That might mean we want a higher fixed charge versus the, you know, variable charge. And so we'll be looking at and thinking about those particular goals and objectives. And then we'll come back with identifying, if we change anything, what kind of impact would that look like? You know, based on where we are today, what you're paying today versus what our proposed changes is, what kind of impact would that look like or be on a customer? Your existing water rates today are billed monthly. They are based on meter size. And so all of your customer classes, residential, commercial, et cetera, have the same meter charge by size, depending on what size meter you have. And so it doesn't change by size. Consumption charge does change, and it is class specific. And so your residential is a tiered rate structure with about 4 tiers or blocks. And we'll show that on the next slide. Multifamily industrial actually pays seasonal rates. So depending on winter versus summer use, you have a different rate. And the others are what we call a uniform or flat rate, which is you pay the same amount of rate for all water use. And then there is an outside city differential included in your rates.
And that's one of the, so that outside city multiplier, that's one of the things that this study is going to tell us a little bit more clearly, if those adjustments, the 1.0x, if that is accurate or not, or if we need to increase that.
We can look at that. Generally, that's a different analysis
Okay.
in terms of the actual factor.
Mhm.
And so a lot of times we'll just say, okay, you have this factor, we're just going to carry it forward. That's something that we can chat about
Okay.
and
Okay, thank you.
discuss if we need to be looking at that specifically.
Can you explain the rate multiplier a little bit more? I'm not exactly sure what you mean there. I mean,
So-
I understand that. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so your inside city rates are a certain charge and your outside city customers pay 1.06 more than your inside city customers for the meter charge, and then 1.25 times more on the consumption rate than your inside city customers.
Okay.
It is a fairly common practice in terms of fees.
And those are separate line items on the bill, the meter charge and the consumption charge.
Correct.
Okay.
Actually, here we go.
Oh, there it is.
And so this is just a quick summary, and this will be something good as we move through the rate study process. This might be something that we come back to, and you'll see quite often is a summary of your existing rates, because we will be coming back and looking at them and identifying again, do we need to make any changes? Is something, seem awry? Have you been hearing from the community about various different rates that you want to be thinking about and looking at? And so again, here we just wanted to summarize really what your existing rates are for the water utility. Wastewater rates, so billed monthly again, flat rate for your single family. Multifamily, however, is charged per unit on the sewer rate. It is a fraction of the single family rate, so that is also a common methodology. So if you are charging multifamily a per unit charge, it would generally be less than a one single family equivalent. And so you are accounting for that. Commercial is charged per account on the fixed rate. All customers are charged for flow. Residential and multifamily is based on an average winter water consumption. And again, that is a common practice because really what we want to make sure of is we're not charging for water use that is not contributing to the sewer system. So irrigation type of water not being charged on the sewer bill. So again, a good common practice to use. And no rate multipliers for wastewater here because I don't think you serve.
And that's because we don't service. But if in the event with our wastewater treatment plant, we did decide to service outside, then we would need to
could
be
be an
looking at that
option.
multiplier.
Yep.
Okay.
And then again, here's your wastewater rates and fees. Single family, so fairly simplistic in terms of this compared to the water. The water has a little bit more detail, but your commercial and 1 and 2 do have what we call block rates. So 0 to 6,000 gallons, one rate, over 6,000 gallons. And so we'll be polling to see if that is sufficient. Rate structures align with your objectives. So this is really where it's going to come down to when we talked about alignment, what you currently have today, what you're trying, your community wants and needs today. Is it in alignment with what our overall objectives are today? Again, it's been 10 years. And so we just want to make sure that we're putting a good look, a fresh refresh on what we're doing. And so a lot of times people look at these as some good kind of things to think about when you think about rate structure. So financial sustainability or stability, conservation and efficiency, promoting efficient use of the resource, transparency and simplicity, fairness and equity, and affordability. And so the interesting part here is that, gosh, probably 10 years ago, conservation would have been up pretty high on the list with revenue stability. Now we're seeing affordability. Conservation is kind of going like this, affordability is going, increasing higher. So it does change in terms of different communities and what you're trying to accomplish throughout the years.
This was a helpful slide for, and this is standard practice. This is, I wasn't certain if this was something that was carried over because this is very complete and thorough. So as we're moving forward as a template for these are the things that we're trying to get towards, this is very helpful.
Excellent. And so again, you all might bring things differently, right? And we've actually done that sometimes. It's staff might do a ranking and council might do a ranking, and we'll kind of see where do we start aligning, and are we getting to where we need to be with these rate structures? But this is helpful for the consultant because there's a number of different rate structures that are out there. One might advance one objective more than the other, and sometimes there's a conflict. So the highest equity in terms of a rate structure might not be very feasible to administer or very simple. So sometimes there's a balancing act and there's conflict between them. And so we sometimes have to resolve that conflict, really what's more important in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. And then one slide on new user facility fee. Again, so that was what we had just heard about was on the existing customer rates. This is strictly just for new connections to the system. One-time fee for new connections, so not ongoing rates, represents a value of the share of system capacity that the new user will utilize. Fees are to be used on capital-related obligations only, so not to be used on operating costs. Again, the methodology here is based on that 2015 Idaho Supreme Court ruling, so pretty prescribed methodology that we have there. Really, the overall work that happens here is looking at the assets that you have in the ground, making sure that they are representative of what is there versus the asset registry, and making sure that we're valuing our system appropriately, as well as looking to make sure how many users can the existing system support. Even though we might have plans to upgrade or add capacity, we really have to focus on what the existing system has today and the existing users we can support. And then here we are, city council input feedback. There was a lot thrown at you in this last several slides. Again, here we're looking just to see if anything spurred anything. Was there a spark of, okay, yep, this is one thing that I want to make sure that you put on your list that, this is what we want to have addressed in this particular rate study. So this is really your opportunity to kind of put anything on the table.
Council, feel free.
You answered my questions. Thank you.
Okay.
It's very thorough, and I look forward to, this should be interesting.
Great. And again, there will be more time, more engagement time in terms of.
Can you tell me a little bit about your process? At the beginning, you shared that part of your role, FCS's role in this rate study is public education and outreach once you get to that point. What does that look like?
A lot of times what that will look like, it will come in the rate design phase really, because it's really identifying, here's kind of what our overall obligations are. So we're gonna have some presentations, to you all that the public obviously will be able to hear in terms of what are our overall needs. How did we come up with you needing X amount of dollars and why did you need X amount of dollars? What were the inputs? So the budgets, the capital plans. And so we'll actually go through each of our key inputs and key factors that go into each of our tasks. So the revenue requirement, we're going to let everybody know what we use as the basis for that revenue requirement, how we projected costs into the future. Because again, this is a 20-year plan, what kind of escalation factors we use, so they're very transparent, very open in terms of what that overall technical analysis includes in terms of how we construct those various different analyses. And so we'll again have a presentation like this, outline each of our various different key factors and assumptions, and then come back with some of the results. Generally, we'll always come back with some options, right? Okay, based on your input. So there's not always just one answer. It's here's what this came back to in terms of the baseline, but we've also heard that maybe these are some various different variables that the council community would like to see. And so we'll come back with some options for consideration. And so those will be presented as well for consideration and input. And so then we'll take feedback, adjust, come back, and then we can decide on how we want to move forward in terms of that. And so it's a very give and take in terms of collaboration of here's this first step, here's the results and initial findings, how do we want to move forward to the next step. Okay, in terms of the rate design and really where the community it will come in is that when we come back with rate structures, and so if we need a rate increase or we're changing rate structure, we can do bill comparisons. And so many times we will have a dashboard that will show, okay, well, here's these different rate structures. The community can possibly go in, we can have it on the website and say, okay, well, how is this going to affect me? You can put your bill in, you can, put various different consumption levels in, meter size, et cetera. And so somebody could actually go in and see how that would actually affect their particular bill, because it's going to be different, right? We say the average impact is going to be X, but the reality is I'm not necessarily the average users a lot of times. And so having the ability or tool set to say, if I can actually input my various different bill or, what my particular situation is, then I know how it really affects me. Okay. And then really talking about the rate structure. And so if we're talking about a conservation-based rate structure, does everybody really know what that means? And how many customers are going to be affected? So we'll do bill frequency analyses that will identify, well, how many customers are going to be affected with us changing potentially with this particular rate structure. Okay.
Ms. Mayor, if I may. So Jennifer, does this mean we'll have a series of public workshops for the public like we usually do?
Correct. So it is planned moving forward to have a series of workshops going into the spring. Public outreach obviously we'll have information too on the website, can get information out in utility bills. The other thing I would like to note for council relative to priorities that have been communicated by staff already, and what drives a lot of those priorities and considerations we've asked FCS group to look at is really input that we're getting from citizens throughout the year. One of our best ones for collecting that information, who had a lot of input into things that need to be considered, is Michelle, our utilities billing clerk, because she's the one that's dealing with the public and ratepayers. One thing I would note about our current rate structure, so we had asked them to look at, is we have a very complicated rate structure. And so for Michelle, with customers who are coming in and paying their bills, explaining what our structure is and how it works, it takes a lot of time to explain. It's difficult to understand, and it's difficult at the front end as well for people with new services, and what their hookup fees are and why, and then for staff to determine what is the appropriate rate. So we have a complicated enough structure. It's difficult to understand. It can also leave open the opportunity for errors. So simplifying, I think, from both a staff administration as well as from a public use understanding is very important from the staff and public input we've received. In addition, the conservation rate structure, kind of as Angie has alluded to, we know when we're coming to that time, kind of like when we're coming to peak snow removal time. During the August and September billing cycles, it's when utility bills are going out, it's almost a constant influx in the doors of residents who are really unhappy with their dramatic increases that they're seeing in the summer months, and understanding the why about that. And it is our conservation rate structure. And actually, when Michelle had done some analysis even before we had FCS group look at this, and I don't know as what we were intending to achieve with the conservation rate structure was effectively achieved. And then a consideration for council in that regard too is when we see such a significant jump in costs, what that means is people don't want to water their lawns because the cost is so high, and we're in the middle of a peak fire season. So those are some of the things that we've seen. And then to the question earlier regarding industrial users versus commercial users versus large facility users, actually in looking at our data more closely, Lighthouse is considered a large user. Why they're a large user as opposed to an industrial user, I can't actually answer that for you. Industrial users, a couple examples of that would be Daher, for example, or Diedrich Coffee Roasters up in Ponderay. So the closer alignment with our types of users relating to our water use, relating to the type of building use would also be another simplification and more clear, because it also becomes unclear again for users. They may be a commercial business, but in terms of our water rates, we aren't considering them a commercial user. So we've got those discrepancies across different functions in the city that then create confusion and an appearance that there's an error one way or the other. So the opportunity to clean some of those things up are really priorities from a city staff standpoint, as well as based on public input that we've received.
Thank you.
Angie, I have a couple more questions for you. I assume you do work across the state of Idaho. Do you work outside of the state as well?
We do, yes.
Okay.
So Washington, Oregon, Colorado. So we have an office in Oregon as well. So it's Lake Oswego, Oregon, Boulder, Colorado, and then Redmond and Spokane, Washington. But we generally do kind of west of the Rockies is a lot of our work.
Okay. And one thing, and I'm curious what your perception of this is, but our utility rates here in Sandpoint are notoriously high relative to the rest of the state. And that's for a couple of reasons. And so when we get to the sort of workshop education component of your work, I think it's important to, acknowledge that and address that for the public and try to impart some understanding there. As I understand it, we have really clay tight soils here, which means ultimately that, we can have high runoff events, and we end up having to build a wastewater treatment system that is far oversized relative to the size of our city. Similarly, in our water service sector, we have essentially not only duplicative services in that we have a lake plant and we have a Sand Creek plant. A typical city of our size would have one source. Not only that, do we have two sources, but then those are both surface water sources, which require a much higher level of treatment than, say, a deep well, right? Where you just literally pull the water out of the ground, you test it and you serve it, right? So these are, factors that, dramatically increase the cost of providing service for the city. And so that's why when you look across the state, city of Sandpoint rates are, some of the highest in the state. And I think it would be important to, address that during your workshops, and perhaps you could provide, comparative analysis of maybe another city or two that you've served that is in a similar kind of situation. And so that the public can understand where that high cost is coming from.
Absolutely. And you bring up a very good point. So those comparisons are one of the things that we really hate to use those comparisons. We know people love them, right? But there's so many different, it's like apples and oranges. Yeah. And so we absolutely, we will try to get that a little bit more in alignment in terms of some of the comparisons, or at least be able to explain why your rates may be higher than, others as well.
Thank you. Any other questions, council? All right, thank you for that presentation.
Yes, and I think that's pretty much it. And so we'll be back again at key milestones from March to April and then again in June to try to get you some of those technical analyses, but we are underway. And so we look forward to continuing our work. Thank you for your patience this evening.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Home.
Yes, safe
Thank you.
trip home.
I think that was a record number of slides.
I
too,
think
for a
so,
present-
right? I know. It's like, okay, tolerance levels. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm sorry, is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on this matter?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, moving on. The final item under old business this evening is consideration of a professional services agreement for regional transportation plan. Infrastructure and Development Services Manager Amanda Wilson will provide a presentation for us.
Thank you,
And
Mr. Mayor.
I meant director, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, council members. Share my screen here. All right, this evening, our request before you is your consideration of approving a local professional service agreement between the city of Sandpoint and AECom Technical Services for the completion of an urban area transportation plan. So what is an urban area transportation plan? In short, it is a multi-jurisdictional plan that really looks at comprehensively looks at an analysis and implementation strategy for our urban area. We're going to talk a little bit more this evening about what our urban area includes and doesn't include. But the final document is intended to serve as sort of our regional transportation plan that looks at our priorities as well as policy guidelines, capital improvements, as well as funding strategies for the next 20 years. So it's intended as a 20-year vision. That said, we are about 12 years actually was the last time we updated our urban area transportation plan. So typically you would review a plan every 5 to 10 years. So it's time for us to take another look at this one. The urban area is defined by the US Census Bureau. The current map and defined area is from 2010. The jurisdictions that make up the urban area include all of the cities represented before you. And the collective effort here is coordinating all of these jurisdictions. When we look at Bonner County, it's not all of Bonner County. It's just portions of unincorporated Bonner County as represented in this map, which you'll see on the southern portion there, includes areas of Sagal. It also includes Dover there to the west. And then obviously Ponderay Kootenai in the city of Sandpoint. The independent
Are the areas in Sago, are they highlighted here? It doesn't look like they're highlighted.
They're in white, which is a little bit challenging.
That's right. I was like, isn't
Compared to the
Sago
gray.
included in the, yeah, okay.
And so then in addition, we have the Independent Highway District who actually owns all of our right of ways within the city of Sandpoint and does the maintenance as well in Kootenai, Ponderay, and other areas of unincorporated Bonner County.
Amanda,
Yes.
does this not include the Schweitzer area? Is
That's
that, it's not included in the urban area? Okay.
So when we're looking at an urban area transportation plan, we talk about, well, we have a lot of plans. Really, what are we trying to get out of this plan? What's the purpose of it? So collective outcomes that have been developed for multiple years. In fact, going back in history and looking at when conversations around urban area transportation plans first began, it was in the early 60s, actually. And so a lot of these same outcomes that we are looking forward to in our urban area transportation and desired outcomes for many, many years across the nation. There's a lot of commonalities. So I'm going to go over them at a really high level, but one of the outcomes is to take a deeper dive into access management. Access management, if you're not familiar with it, is how far away an intersection or a driveway is from another intersection, right? How wide do we require lanes to be? So we take a collective look at that. So across jurisdictions, hopefully we can have some consistency because currently we're kind of all over the board in how we apply those standards. Outcome 2, looking for opportunities to improve and enhance safety and non-standard truck access at grade railroad crossings, as well as preserving an acceptable level of service. That acceptable level of service we've discussed here within the city quite a bit. There's various industry standards ranging from A all the way to F.
Our current acceptable level of service is a D, and looking to do, again, that across all jurisdictions. It does require coordination, obviously, with the Idaho Transportation Department. Streets are very interrelated and flow from one jurisdiction to the other without a specific line on a piece of paper. And most of those streets are actually connected via ITD. So they play a key role in this entire process and will have a seat at the table. Outcome 3, looking for enhanced alternative modes of transportation, looking for opportunities for regional connectivity, as well as compliance with ADA and how we would go about achieving that. You will notice the stakeholders that help develop these outcomes really put a focus on multimodal, and hence we have on this outcome looking at walking, bicycling, ride sharing, carpooling, transit. I think that's a really important aspect when it comes to an urban area transportation plan. When we looked at our multimodal plan specific to the city of Sandpoint, we were looking at how SPOT, for example, primarily serves the city of Sandpoint. Our opportunity on an urban area transportation plan is to look at, okay, how is it serving Dover? And how are we getting to Schweitzer, even though Schweitzer is not technically in the urban area? It's more of that regional planning effort and how we all interrelate with one another. Also looking at things like the community trail, right? That's going from one jurisdiction to another. And so taking a complete look at that and in a comprehensive manner is the intent of the outcome. And then also collectively identifying options to fund some of these capital improvements and maintenance projects. And then, okay, what are the capital improvements that we want to prioritize as a region, as well as evaluating opportunities for optimizing partnerships. One of the primary ways in which we've collaborated on that already is how can we have efficiency gained in GIS mapping, right? Versus every jurisdiction having their own transportation map. Does it make some sense for us to have efficiencies and have a common GIS system with all of the streets? So a little bit of history on this project. We've come before City Council on a few occasions leading up to this evening. Back in December of 19, City Council authorized staff to move forward with submission of a grant. It's for federal dollars to support development of this plan. We were successful in that grant application, as specifically the city of Sandpoint is the lead jurisdiction or the sponsor jurisdiction, with all of those other jurisdictions on the list as co-sponsors. Basically, we're all in it together, but Sandpoint with administrative staff is helping to lead that effort. To that end, we came forward in January of 2021, not that long ago, to accept the grant formally by initiating an agreement between the Idaho Transportation Department as well the Idaho Transportation Department and the city of Sandpoint for approximately $150,000. Just to be clear, the co-sponsors on this project are providing the full 7.4% of the grant match. The city is contributing our staff time, no direct dollars. So as far as professional services go, an urban area plan really is intended to follow industry standard guidelines. So there's some fairly prescriptive processes of analysis that one needs to go through in developing it. Therefore, expertise is required and engaging a professional consultant was necessary. So looking both at city procurement rules as well as state procurement rules, because these are federal dollars, we did go out for a formal public solicitation on selecting a professional consultant. So on April 1st, 2021, we received 3 responses to the request for proposals, formal responses, and we had a committee evaluating those proposals and scored them in accordance with that document, the RFP. The scoring process and the evaluation was extremely formal. It was facilitated by ITD and consistent with state and federal standards. The result of that was AECOM was the highest scored respondent. In your packet that was included, we provided their actual proposal so that you could see some of their experience, but essentially it was based upon not only company, but as well as personnel experience and qualifications, how much resources they could commit to the project and their availability, and their project understanding, as well as quality control. One thing I will note about this particular team that I think impressed the entire evaluation committee was the diverse technical experts that came forward at the table. They are not just a team of engineers. While that's super important in this process, they also have planners as part of their team that are AICP certified. They also have professional transportation operation engineers. So those are PEs that are really focused and have additional training in multimodal transportation and how all of that fits together. So that was one aspect of their proposal that really impressed the entire team, was that balance of perspectives. That said, the agreement that we are requesting authorization to proceed with is a standard ITD contract form in a total amount of $155,000. So that includes not only the grant, but a portion of the contributing match funds. That's why the amount is higher than the grant amount. The completion date for this project is currently forecasted at August 1st, 2023. And as I mentioned in the staff report in your packet, it's essentially broken into two phases. The first phase is a significant amount of public engagement and really looking at what do we need here? What do we need to accomplish in the second phase of the strategies? So that is set to kick off actually this month if this is a contract is approved this evening. We have our kickoff meeting on January 26th, and then we will get moving right into the public engagement component of that and diving into what does public engagement look like on this project. We haven't answered that yet, but that is one of the very first steps. The full scope and contract was included in your packet. One thing I do want to note, and it is in blue on your screen this evening, is we did have an amendment to it that came in today. That amendment does not change the total contract amount. However, it does increase the disadvantaged business enterprise participation amount from 7% to 10%. So as part of the federal dollars, it was required that the proposers include DBE firms, which they did. That is Rosemary, Brennan, Curtin. The minimum requirement was 7%. However, AECom in their proposal stated they would provide 10%. Therefore, it's required that they provide the 10%. So just hours were reallocated to ensure that that happened. So the total contract amount, again, remains the same. This is just a shift in the breakdown of who's performing what. So I already discussed the public engagement plan. What I can say is we've had much discussion about the various modes in which we intend to do the outreach, whether that's online and workshops and going to events. I'm confident that the public engagement firm that they have on board has extensive experience in this type of transportation planning, and we'll put together a really great public engagement plan in that regard. We will have multiple coordination meetings with all of those jurisdictions. And then just a note here, the consultant costs are passed through the city of Sandpoint. So as the lead sponsor, we pay the consultant and we get reimbursed by ITD. That's why it does affect our budget as far as a line item on it. Also, I really think it's important to note that all of that planning effort with our transportation plan is not lost. It will be incorporated into this urban area plan. We've had much discussion already to date about that, and really taking some of those elements and carrying them forward into this plan at a broader level. We will be returning to City Council and the public with multiple updates. This is not the last time you hear from us before you're asked to adopt the plan. We'll give you multiple updates, keep you informed on what we're hearing from the public and what some of those outcomes are, with an anticipated final adoption in late of 2023. So with that, I would open it up for any questions.
Amanda, I just want to make a comment. I can imagine that a lot of people out there, maybe even council members, are wondering, why do we need an urban area transportation plan when we just passed a multimodal transportation plan? And I can appreciate that question. And I think the easiest way to understand it, and you did speak to this, but I just want to underscore it a little bit. First of all, the multimodal transportation plan is a local streets plan. It's City of Sandpoint making a plan for our streets and capital improvements and our infrastructure going forward. The urban area transportation plan is required by the state, and they're, again, as you said, Amanda, they're really looking at that interurban from community to community throughout the region. They're looking at that regional transportation network. So they're looking at highway systems, how people get from one community to the next. And that's why, Schweitzer's not included. It's not part of the highway system, or there's no, it's not connected by a highway system. Although, would be, yeah, and maybe you want to comment on that more, Amanda, but I think that the bottom line is, when we are going out looking for, grant funding for, capital improvements, whether it's improvements to, let's say, Highway 2 going through Sandpoint, or Fifth Avenue, which is also part of Highway 2, or maybe Superior as it comes off 95. These kinds of linkages, those are opportunities to get funding from the state, whether it's pass-through funding. And unless those kinds of elements are included in the urban area transportation plan, then they're not really taken seriously in terms of our grant application. So that's why this is important and why it's a separate from our multimodal plan. But as Amanda said, the multimodal plan will be integrated into this. So, this will make any, applications that we create going forward for funding for, particularly for the highway network, but for other linkages with other communities, it's going to make our grant applications really much stronger and able to be funded. Okay.
I think you summarized that well. The only piece I might add is that I would not be surprised, I'm speculating, but I wouldn't be surprised if in the future we potentially see Schweitzer included. The urban area is strictly defined by density. I mean, that's why it's based upon the census data. We're still using the 2010. That is the current census map. And that's okay. In 5 years, when we go to update this one again, we can take a look to see if the 2020 map has changed anything. But just looking at sheer density and volume of traffic and where users are going, you hit the nail on the head, that it is really about that interconnectivity between and through all of our jurisdictions. And just because we might have a map that shows a line of who's included in the urban area, streets don't have clean lines, right? And so just because a street goes beyond a line doesn't mean it can't be included in this plan.
So two questions. Can we rest assured that the vision of the multimodal plan will be protected as it's incorporated into the UATP, or will elements of that be foregone in our development of this plan? Because there was a lot of vetting, there was a lot of consensus and support for that plan.
Agreed. My sense is that this plan is not replacing the other plan. We still have adopted the multimodal transportation plan. Elements of the multimodal plan, I think, are true in all transportation plans, because it's not only the city of Sandpoint that is promoting and recognizing the benefits of multimodal, right? That we need to look at all user types. That's really coming even at a federal level and a state level, and all of the partnering jurisdictions on this have communicated to date that some of those elements of our multimodal plan, they respect and want to see carried forward. So I think the fact that we're doing this public engagement process, I anticipate we'll hear a lot of those same themes that we heard during our multimodal effort carry forward.
And a follow-up, something that Mayor Shelby pointed out, if the multimodal plan ends up as part of the UATP, does that increase the likelihood that we'll get grant funding for some of the elements of the multimodal plan?
I'll defer that question to Jennifer. I can only speculate what would increase, but I would say, yes, the more plans a project is in, the greater it will rank and score and be perceived.
Thank you, Councillor. I appreciate the question. Yes, that's the critical element, and actually some of the criticism in the past regarding participation in the development of the urban area transportation plan is historically what's happened. It does increase our likelihood of getting funded. The more plans, the more collaboration, adopted plans and collaboration for projects that we're putting forward, the greater competitiveness for grant programs. One of the challenges when we get into working on this multi-jurisdictional approach is that because so much of the density in the area flows in and throughout Sandpoint, we work together as jurisdictions on an urban area transportation plan, and the majority of the funding that comes in historically has come into this jurisdiction for our projects. And that's due to the impact of number of users, travel. So yes, in short answer, yes, it does increase the competitiveness. And that was one of the considerations with the mayor and with Amanda as we looked at, do we put staff time towards leading this urban area effort? And there is a direct correlation and benefit to Sandpoint, we believe, in addition to the multiple jurisdiction approach.
Thank you. Council, any other questions? Great, thank you for that presentation. Is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on this matter? Oh, can you come forward to the podium, and if you could, for the record, state your name and whether or not you reside in the city of Sandpoint?
Tom Carroll. Yes, I reside in the city.
Thank you.
In one of your earliest slides, I can't call which one. Did I hear correctly that Sandpoint rated a D in this? And if that being the case, what were the criteria and who made that judgment, please?
Mr. Mayor, may I?
Yeah,
ask a
please.
question?
Yeah.
Thank you. To be clear, the reference to a D is the level of service. So that is specifically around intersections. We, from an engineering perspective, assess through modeling how an intersection functions. You can have a score of A, means it's functioning really, really well. And a score of F means it's congested and you have significant delay time to get through that intersection, right? Long queuing distances, pedestrian congestion, et cetera. So the level of service that's acceptable to a community is really unique to that community. It also is unique to where you're at within a community at times, right? So in a downtown core, often jurisdictions find that more congestion is okay because we want to ensure that slower vehicles is, accommodating pedestrians, for example, versus when you're in, say, a more rural area or in the county on a rural county road, it tends to frustrate people more. They want mobility and they want to get through things in a quicker manner. So you might find that an acceptable level of service is a B or a C at an intersection. So historically, when our last urban area transportation plan was adopted, we adopted a level of service of D instead of a C, which is what some other jurisdictions would find to be as like a median average. That's really just taking kind of a conscious effort at saying we value pedestrians and the safety of bicyclists and that we have multiple modes of transportation at our intersections. And then our multimodal transportation plan carried that level of service forward.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
And the multimodal plan explains it well, right? The level of service, and it's on our website.
Yes.
Right. So if you can go on the City of Sandpoint website and the multimodal plan is there and it explains it really well what the level of service means and how we are rated a D. I understood every bit of it. So I imagine, sir, that you would as well if you would like to read the multimodal plan. You're welcome.
Thank you, Madam President. Anyone else who would like to comment on this matter?
Mr. Mayor, as just a point of clarification for the record on this, I'd also like to add from a planning perspective that one of the benefits of utilizing a professional service like this is to ensure that we don't create any inconsistencies between our multimodal plan and the urban area transportation plan. So I'd just like to add, as we are sort of in this movement of growth and planning, that a professional service like this is advantageous from that perspective as well.
That's an excellent point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
I just had a question or comment, request actually for Amanda. When we do have the public engagement, do you know how far in advance the public will know when those meetings are? And if I could request that they have a couple weeks notice so that if there are individuals that want to take time off from work or schedule around that so they can be present, they have enough time to do that. So, and I know all of our meetings can't be after 9 to 5, but then we have other people that are off during those times and may be busier in the evenings. So I would make that request for the public. So.
Understood.
Thank you.
All right. Any other comments or questions from the public? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the resolution for local professional services agreement with AECOM Technical Services Incorporated. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? This will be a roll call vote.
Councillor Sparrow,
Yes.
Councillor McAllister,
Yes.
Councillor Rule,
Yes.
Councillor Grote,
Yes.
Councillor Dick,
Yes.
Councillor Weckler.
Yes.
Motion passes. The only item, I think, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, the only item under new business is a consideration of a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. City Administrator Jennifer Stapleton will provide us with a presentation. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think, well, this one will be a quick one. What is before council for consideration tonight is acceptance of a grant. It is federal funding from the National Endowment for the Arts program, and it is their Arts American Rescue Plan program to primarily to provide for subgranting support for arts agencies that are impacted by the COVID pandemic. We applied for a grant in the amount of $150,000. $50,000 was awarded to support the newly created part-time position here at the city for our Creative Vitality Coordinator, Historic Preservation Officer, which we will be posting here in the coming days, and an additional $100,000 to support pass-through grants to arts and culture, local arts and culture agencies in our community. As proposed and awarded, this would be a project and activity of this new position in conjunction with our Arts, Culture, Historic Preservation Commission, with the general guidance about supporting arts agencies, and primarily it's around staff support and program support as opposed to capital support, because again, it's about COVID impacts and ensuring the survivability of those agencies. We have flexibility to design a subgrant program, and administer those subgrants to agencies operating here in the Sandpoint area. So again, it's a $150,000 grant, and I would note that we were the only local jurisdiction in the state of Idaho to receive one of these grants. They're extremely competitive. So this is really a kudos for the work that went into this, and also recognition of past work with subgranting grants. We had to show that expertise as well as expertise in an ability to effectively manage federal grants.
Fantastic. Congratulations. All right, well, so hearing that, does council have any questions? All right. Is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on this matter? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to accept the grant from the National Endowment for the Arts.
So moved.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? This will be a roll call vote.
Councillor Welker,
Yes.
Councillor Grote,
Yes.
Councillor McAllister,
Yes.
Councillor Dick,
Yes.
Councillor Espero,
Yes.
Councillor Rule.
Yes.
Motion passes. And we have a newly populated Arts and Historic Preservation Commission that is now fully funded.
Yeah, nice.
All right. Okay, the final item on the agenda this evening is an executive session. Before I entertain a motion, I would just like to thank the public for coming this evening, congratulate the new commission members, and thank you, everybody, and hope you have a good night.
Drive safe.
And as people are filtering out, I would entertain a motion to convene an executive session pursuant to Idaho Code Section 74-2061F to communicate with city legal counsel to discuss the legal ramifications of and legal options for pending litigation or controversies not yet being litigated but imminently likely to be litigated. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. This will be a roll call vote.
Councillor Dick,
Yes.
Councillor McAllister,
Yes.
Councillor Espero,
Yes.
Councillor Rule,
Yes.
Councillor Welker,
Yes.
Councillor Grote.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to wait for just a moment.